Writer and computer scientist Gurwinder Bhogal put it plainly. Often we fail to improve our lives simply because things don't get bad enough. If your new job is hell, you'll leave it. If it's just unsatisfying, you'll likely grind it out. The small problems often threaten our quality of life more than the big ones. Small problems often threaten your life, the quality of your life, more than big ones. Not because small problems are more painful, because they are not painful enough to force a response. The job that is genuinely awful, the one that makes you dread Monday from Thursday afternoon, the one that keeps you up at night, the one that has produced visible damage to your health, your relationships, your sense of self, that job, you'll leave. The pain is acute enough. The signal is loud enough. The body and mind mobilize towards the exit. But the job that is just unsatisfying, the relationship that is just a little flat, the city you live in that is just not quite right, the version of your life that is fine, not great, not terrible, just fine, that's where you'll stay indefinitely, grinding it out, adjusting, adapting, finding new ways to make peace with the water temperature that is slowly, imperceptibly rising. There's a name for this in psychology. It's called the boiling frog syndrome. And the frog in this metaphor is not weak or foolish. It is doing exactly what biology designed it to do, adapting to its environment, normalizing the change, surviving the incremental shift, right up until the moment survival is no longer possible. This is episode of Spark and Hustle, and I am Puneet Kaur, and today we're going to talk about the most dangerous word in English language for any person, not just ambitious people. The word is fine. Not bad, not broken, not in crises, just fine. And why fine? Not disaster, maybe the thing most quietly threatening your one life. Let's go. Today, we're going to explore the danger of fine, the psychology of settling, and the stoic alarm system that most people have forgotten how to hear. And if you scroll down to the region beta paradox, you will see I talk about this concept, but in a very short form. This one, we're going to dig deeper. Let's start with the mechanism. Because the psychology of why people stay in tolerable situations is not a mystery. It's one of the most well-documented patterns in behavioral science. And understanding it is the beginning of escaping it. The foundational concept is what psychologists call adaptation level theory, developed by Harry Helson at the University of Texas in the 1960s. Helson's core insight: human perception is not absolute. It is relative, calibrated continuously to the current baseline. What we experience as comfortable, normal, acceptable, or tolerable is not a fixed standard. It is whatever we have adapted to. The person who moves from a genuinely difficult situation to a merely unsatisfying one experiences initially relief. The comparison to the previous baseline produces a felt sense of improvement. But over time, as adaptation occurs, as the new baseline is established, as the contrast with the previous difficulty fades, the unsatisfying situation stops, registering as better than what came before. It becomes simply how things are. And how things are over time becomes what is expected, what is tolerated, what is so normalized that it no longer produces a signal. The discomfort, the dissatisfaction, the productive unhappiness that would motivate change. This is the cruelty of adaptation. It was designed for survival, the capacity to normalize difficult circumstances, to stop experiencing them as acutely distressing when they cannot be immediately changed, is an enormous evolutionary gift in environments where stoic endurance of unavoidable hardship is the only option. But it is catastrophically misapplied to environments where change is available. but uncomfortable, where the situation can be improved, but the improvement would require disruption, where the tolerable could become good and the good could become excellent, but the machinery of adaptation has smoothed over the signal that would motivate the journey. The boiling frog metaphor captures this precisely. The frog placed directly into boiling water jumps immediately. The pain is acute, the threat is unambiguous, the response is automatic. With the frog placed in water, the heat gradually adapts to each incremental temperature increase. Each degree of heat becomes a new baseline. The discomfort never reaches the threshold that triggers the escape response. And the frog adapts, accommodates, normalizes until the water is boiling and the capacity to respond has been depleted. The research on workplace dissatisfaction shows this pattern with shrinking precision. Studies on job satisfaction and turnover consistently find that the employees most likely to leave a job are not those experiencing moderate dissatisfaction. They are those experiencing acute dissatisfaction. The moderately dissatisfied employee stays, adapts, recalibrates expectations downward, and eventually reaches what researchers called resigned adaptation, a state in which the dissatisfaction is real, but the expectation of better has been quietly abandoned. This is not weakness. It is the adaptation mechanism doing its job. The problem is that the job it was designed for, surviving unavoidable hardship, is not the job the modern ambitious person needs it for. The modern ambitious person needs a mechanism for recognizing avoidable mediocrity and responding to it before adaptation has normalized it into invisibility. Loss aversion, the well-documented finding from Kahneman and Tversky's prospect theory, research that the pain of losing something is approximately twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining an equivalent, compounds the problem. Leaving the tolerable situation, even for a genuinely better one, requires quitting what currently exists. And the brain registers that quitting or relinquishment as a loss, not a trade. Even when the trade is objectively favorable, the loss aversion mechanism makes staying feel safer than moving. The Stoics saw this pattern not in language of behavioral economics, but with equivalent precision. Seneca, writing to Lucilius, was relentless on the danger of what he called the half-life, the existence that is neither fully engaged nor decisively abandoned, the occupation that neither fulfills nor breaks, the company that neither inspires nor obviously destroys. He wrote, "It is not that I have a lot of time, it is that I waste none of it." And the greatest waste he identified was not the time spent on clearly bad choices. It was a time spent on choices that were neither clearly bad nor clearly good. The slow drain of years spent in situations that produced nothing worth having and cost nothing worth noticing in any single day. My introduction to Stoics was this letters of Seneca, and I have been hooked since. So, going back to our topic, this is the first truth. Adaptation level theory explains why tolerable situations are more dangerous than terrible ones. The mechanism that normalizes hardship was designed for unavoidable suffering, not for the avoidable mediocrity that ambitious people can change but don't. Loss aversion keeps people in place. And time, the only non-renewable resource, drains away in increments too small to feel but too large to recover. Let's talk about what fine actually costs. Because one of the most effective arguments for staying in a tolerable situation is that it costs nothing. It's not bad. You're surviving. You could be in much worse circumstances. Why fix what isn't broken? The research says more than you think. The first cost is cognitive. The brain is not neutral about chronic dissatisfaction. even when that dissatisfaction is below the threshold of acute pain. Research on what psychologists call ego depletion and cognitive load shows that unresolved negative situations draw continuously on executive cognitive resources. The prefrontal cortex's capability and capacity for attention, planning, regulation, and decision making. The tolerable job that you haven't addressed is now sitting quietly in the background of your life. The relationship you're not leaving is not just there, it is occupying mental bandwidth, producing low-level rumination, generating background anxiety, requiring ongoing psychological management. Every day you spend in an unsatisfying situation, be it work, be it relationships, be it friendships, without resolving it, is a day in which a portion of your cognitive resources are allocated to managing the situation rather than to the things that matter most. Researchers have documented this phenomenon under various names: cognitive residue, mental clutter, unfinished business, and the finding is consistent. Unresolved situations that fall below the threshold of crisis, but above the threshold of true acceptance, draw a continuous tax on cognitive performance. The brilliant person grinding through an unsatisfying role is not bringing their full cognitive capacity to the role. They're bringing their full capacity minus the ongoing allocation to unresolved dissatisfaction they haven't addressed. The second cost is motivational. Research on self-determination theory, developed by Deci and Richard Ryan at the University of Rochester, identifies autonomy, competence, and relatedness as the three fundamental psychological needs whose fulfillment drives intrinsic motivation and sustained engagement. Chronic dissatisfaction in any of these domains produces what Deci Ryan called motivation, the progressive erosion of internal drive, not from laziness, but from the sustained experience of psychological need deprivation. The person who stays too long in the fine job, the fine relationship, the fine version of their life does not merely maintain a neutral motivational state. They erode it. The longer the deprivation of genuine need fulfillment continues, the more depleted the motivational resources that will be available for the next chapter. The third cost, and perhaps the most insidious, is the opportunity cost. Every year spent in the tolerable situation is a year not spent in the genuinely good one. Every year of resigned adaptation is a year during which skills that good situations develop, the relationships that good environments produce, the compound growth that meaningful work generates, none of it is happening. And here's what makes opportunity cost particularly hard to feel. It is invisible. The job not taken produces no pain of its own, only the pain of comparison with what might have been, which the adaptation mechanism efficiently suppresses. The relationship not pursued leaves no scar, only the quiet statistical reality that time available for building something genuinely good is finite and diminishing. The Stoics were perhaps the most precise philosophers in history on the subject of time as the ultimate non-renewable resource. Seneca has a whole letter, The Shortness of Life. He wrote it in 49 AD, and it is, in my opinion, still among the most urgent documents in Western philosophy. It begins from the observation that human life is not short. It is wasted. And the primary mechanism of waste he identifies is not catastrophic failure or dramatic misadventure. It is the slow, comfortable, barely noticed consumption of years by situations that are tolerable, but not truly alive. It is not that we have a short time to live, and this is straight from his letter, but that we waste a lot of it. Life is long enough, and sufficiently generous amount has been given to us for the highest achievements if it were all well invested. But where it is wasted in heedless luxury, spent on no good activity, we are forced at last by death's final constraint to realize that it has passed away before we knew it was passing. The version of your life that is fine, these are not dramas, they are not catastrophes, they are the heedless luxury Seneca was describing, the comfortable waste of the only resource that cannot be recovered. Now, this is the second truth. Chronic low-grade dissatisfaction is not neutral. It costs cognitive bandwidth through unresolved mental load, erodes intrinsic motivation through sustained psychological need deprivation, and accumulates opportunity cost that is invisible in any single day, but devastating across years. The price of fine is paid not in acute pain, but in the slow compound interest of an unlived potential. Understanding why fine is dangerous is necessary, but not sufficient. Because most people, when presented with this argument, nod along and then return to the situation they were in before. Because the forces that keep people in tolerable situations are powerful, specific, and require specific responses. How about we name a few of these primary forces? The first one, comparison to worse. The tolerable situation is almost always accompanied by an easy access to comparison with something worse. We don't have it that bad, right? The fine job compares favorably to, let's say, unemployment. The flat relationship compares favorably to loneliness. The city that isn't quite right compares favorably to a more difficult circumstance. The availability of a worst comparison does not make the current situation good, but it does make the current situation feel acceptable, which is sufficient to suppress the motivation for change. This is the main insight from Bhogal in action. The situation that is bad enough to demand comparison with something worse is dangerous only in proportion to its badness. The situation that is good enough to suppress the comparison, but bad enough to extract a daily cost is more insidious one. The Stoic response is precise. The relevant comparison is not the worst available alternative. It is the best generally achievable one. The relevant question is not, could this be worse? It is, could this be better? And if honest answer is yes, then the comparison to worse is a sedative, not a justification. So the second force, sunk cost investment. The tolerable situation almost always has a significant prior investment attached to it. Years, relationships, credentials, identity. Leaving it requires acknowledging at some level that the investment was misallocated. And the brain, operating under loss aversion, registers that acknowledgement at a loss rather than correction. I have a whole podcast on sunk cost fallacy. So if you want to dig deeper on sunk cost, please go listen to that one. Now, what is a counter strategy, right? We talked about all the forces at play. We talked about, two key ones. We're going to talk about one more force. But let's talk about the Stoic counter strategy. We have to think about the retrospective evaluation, right? We have to think about, can this be prospective instead of retrospective? Not what have I already invested, but if I were starting fresh today with no prior investment, would I choose this? The answer to that question, stripped of sunk cost, is the true evaluation of whether staying serves the future or merely honors the past. Now, a third force that comes to play is uncertainty about what better looks like. The fine situation is known, its demands are understood, its rhythms are familiar. The better situation is not only unknown, it is for many people not even clearly imagined. The dissatisfaction is felt, but the alternative is not visible. Research on decision-making under ambiguity consistently shows that people prefer known negatives to unknown alternatives, particularly when the magnitude of the unknown alternative is uncertain. The fine job feels safer than the unknown good job. Not because a fine job is better, but because a good job's goodness cannot be verified in advance. Now, this is again where a Stoic practice of negative visualization, imagining the removal of what currently exists and what you would choose if starting fresh, is most powerful. I actually use this all the time, right? It's not just a tool for for generating an answer, but as a tool for generating clarity. What would you build if current situation were suddenly gone? What direction would you move? The answer to that question, asked honestly, often reveals that the alternative is less unknown than the adaptation has made it seem. Now, there is another force at play here, which is social reinforcement of stability. The people around you who have their own investment in your current situation remaining stable will almost always reinforce you staying. The colleague who would miss you if you left, the family who worries about disruption, the friends whose social world is organized around the current version of you. Their reinforcement is not malicious, but it consistently underweighs the cost of staying and overweighs the risk of moving. And because the social environment is the primary source of feedback about whether a decision is reasonable, the voice of comfortable majority is louder than that quieter internal signal of genuine dissatisfaction. Epictetus, who's another famous Stoic, was characteristically blunt about this. He says, if you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid with regard to external things. The decision to leave the fine situation, to disrupt the stable, to pursue the genuinely good at the cost of comfortably tolerable, will almost never be universally supported by the people around you. Accepting that in advance is a prerequisite for making the decision based on honest self-assessment rather than social approval. Now, we discussed two truths, four forces, right? So let's talk about the third truth. The four forces that we talk about, the four forces that keep people in fine, comparison to worse, sunk cost investment, uncertainty about the alternative, and social reinforcement of stability are specific, powerful, and require specific counter strategies. Each can be addressed. None dissolves on its own. Now we need to think about some practical work, right? Because the problem with adaptation is that the signal, the genuine dissatisfaction that should motivate change, gets quieter over time, not louder. The oddity is about recovering the signal before it disappears entirely. So here's 5 questions. You got to ask them honestly in writing, if you can, or do a voice recording of your answers to these questions and then listen to them about every major domain of your life, right? You could choose your job, your relationships, and in my mind, your relationships aren't just your romantic relationships. This could be a relationship with your parents, with your friends, with your kids, with your siblings, with God, universe, whatever you believe in. So, first question, is this situation something I would choose fresh? Strip away history, prior investment. Strip away the familiarity. Strip away the social cost of changing. If you were starting today, same capabilities, same options, no prior history in this situation, would you choose it? The question is the sunk cost corrected. It separates the honest evaluation of the current situation's merit from the accumulated investment that makes leaving feel like a joke or like a loss. The answer asked honestly is often surprisingly clear, and a no answer, even a quiet one, is the beginning of the signal the adaptation has been suppressing. Question number 2. What am I telling myself to make this acceptable? Every tolerable situation is accompanied by a set of self-told narratives. that justify its continuation. It pays well. It pays my bills, sorry. It pays well. It's not that bad. Nobody's situation is perfect. I'm being ungrateful. Things will improve eventually. Now isn't the right time. Write them down or record yourself. Not to dismiss them. Some of them may be valid. Your pay may actually be good. The situation may be a good one, but to see them clearly as what they are, the adaptation mechanisms explanatory framework for why the temperature is fine. The examination of the narrative is not the commitment to leaving. It is a commitment to honesty about what you're actually choosing and why. Right? The goal is not to just leave the situation or discover that you are choosing that as the answer. The goal is to ask these questions honestly and truly know what your reasons are. Question number 3. What would I do differently if I knew things would not improve? Most tolerable situations are tolerated in part because of an implicit expectation of improvement, right? Things will get better. The role will evolve. The relationship will deepen. The city will grow on me. Sometimes that's true. But the research on resigned adaptation suggests that many people are waiting for an improvement that is not coming. And that the waiting itself, the mechanism through which years are lost. Ask the question with the expectation of wait. If you knew with certainty that the situation would remain exactly as it is for the next 5 years, what would you do? The answer often reveals a clarity that the hope of improvement has been obscuring. Here's question number 4. What is the cost of this situation that I have stopped feeling? This is a big one to answer. Adaptation does not eliminate cost. It eliminates the feeling of cost, the cognitive drain, the motivational erosion, the opportunity cost. These continue to happen whether or not they're registered as painful. Try to recover the feeling. Remember what you felt in the first weeks of the situation before you adapted it, before you normalized it. Remember what you imagined for yourself before the situation became the baseline. The gap between that earlier felt sense and the current normalized acceptance is the cost that adaptation has made invisible. Question number 5. What's the smallest credible step away from fine? The question is deliberately modest. Not what would you do in a perfect world. Not what would you do if there were no risk. The smallest credible step, the one that is genuinely achievable, that moves in the direction of better, that doesn't require everything to be resolved before it can be taken. The adaptation mechanism is not defeated by dramatic declarations and ambitious plans. It is defeated by small, specific, consistent steps that begin to generate new evidence, new experiences, new environments, new possibilities that revise the internal picture of what's available. One step, specific, achievable, taken before the signal quiets further. This is the 4th truth, the fine audit. 5 honest questions. And again, the goal is not to try to get out of the situation that you think you're adapting to. The goal is to ask these questions, write or record these honest answers, and assess the situation, right? What would you choose fresh? And it may be, again, something as simple as your relationship with your own body. Are you doing what's right for your body? Or are you comfortable with where it is because it's not broken? It could be something as simple as that. It doesn't need to be life-altering big decisions only. So what narratives are you justifying for the current situations? Are you justifying working out once a month is going to do? Or eating pizza every day will do if you're talking about the body? So what would you rather do if improvement were certain not to come? So let's say you don't make a change if you're talking about health. What would happen? What's the outcome? What cost adaptation has made invisible, right? Are you slowly becoming heart patient? That's the cost of going on with the current lifestyle. And what's the smallest credible step away from fine is? Is it watching your diet? Is it instead of working out once a month, going twice a month? Is practical mechanism for recovering the signal before it disappears? Before you give up on this question altogether, am I treating my body the way I should? Am I in the job I need to be? Am I in the relationship I need to be? Am I having the relationships with God, universe, you know, my kids, my parents? Or am I just going to go on and then it becomes a norm? So there is a conversation that needs to happen inside this episode about permission to be genuinely dissatisfied with fine. Because there is a cultural narrative, particularly strong among people who have achieved a degree of external success, that dissatisfaction with good circumstances is ingratitude. That wanting more than fine, when fine is objectively better than many people's circumstances, is a form of selfishness or moral failure. This narrative is not only wrong, it is for the person, it commonly targets the ambitious person who has achieved a reasonable life, but not yet the right one, generally harmful. The permission to want more than fine is not permission to be insatiable or ungrateful. It is permission to be honest, honest about the difference between what you have and what you could build, honest about the cost of ongoing adaptation, honest about the life that is possible versus the life that is uncomfortable. Viktor Frankl, whose work has appeared in earlier episodes of the series, argued that the desire for meaning is not a luxury or a privilege. It is a fundamental human need, as genuine as the need for food or safety. The person who is well fed and safe, but meaningless, is not adequately provided for. They are experiencing a real deprivation, the one that the comfortable culture of fine systematically minimizes. The research on eudaimonic well-being, the kind of flourishing associated with meaning, purpose, and genuine engagement, consistently distinguishes it from hedonic well-being, the kind associated with pleasure and the absence of pain. A fine life can score very high on hedonic measures, comfortable, not painful, reasonably pleasant, while scoring very low on eudaimonic ones. The person who's comfortable but not flourishing is not ungrateful. They are accurately perceiving the real gap. And the permission to act on that perception, to pursue something genuinely alive rather than something merely tolerable, is not selfishness. It is the most honest and courageous thing available. Marcus Aurelius, in his private journals, never gave himself permission to settle for fine. And those of you who are new, Marcus Aurelius is also one of the Stoic philosophers, actually one of the best ones, if you will. Not because he was unaware of how much he had, he was acutely aware. But because the Stoic standard was not a comfortable life, it was the examining, purposeful, fully engaged life. The life from which nothing that could be better was left tolerable out of comfort or convenience. He wrote, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one. Not be content with being a fine man. Be a good one. Not tolerate a fine life. Build a good one. The standard is not what could be worse. The standard is what could genuinely be." Here's the fifth truth. The permission to want more than fine is not ingratitude. It is integrity, the honest acknowledgement of the gap between what is comfortable and what is genuinely possible. The Stoic standard was never the tolerable life. It was the examined, purposeful, fully engaged one. Let's close with this philosophy, because this episode, more than almost any other, is rooted in the oldest, most fundamental philosophical instruction ever issued. The unexamined life is not worth living. Socrates said it. And while it has become a philosophical cliche, quoted so often that its force has been somewhat diluted in the context of Bhogal's observation, it lands with fresh precision. The unexamined life is not necessarily a terrible one. It may, in fact, be a fine one, comfortable one, stable one, functional, on autopilot, adaptive, quietly and imperceptibly draining away the potential of a person living it, degree by degree, year by year, in a water temperature that never quite reaches the boiling point that would force a response. That is exactly the life Socrates was warning against. Not a disastrous one, you can't miss that. The fine one, the one that asks nothing dramatic of you and therefore gets nothing dramatic from you, the one that you could live indefinitely and arrive at the end of having been, in the deepest sense, absent. It's the relationship where it's fine, but it doesn't really give you what you are looking for in it. It's the relationship you have with your parents that's fine, but it's not the rich experience you're craving, but it's on you to build it. The Stoic alarm system, the daily practice of honest self-examination that Marcus Aurelius mentioned, that Seneca preached, that Epictetus demanded of his students, is not primarily designed for crisis management. It is designed for the direction and detection of the subtle, but gradual, but barely noticeable drift towards a life that is fine, but not fully alive. Stoics call this practice prosouche, attentive watchfulness of one's own inner states, one's own choices, one's own trajectory, not dramatic introspection, daily, quiet, honest attention, the kind that notices when the water temperature has risen 3 degrees without permission, the kind that catches the adaptation before it has normalized the intolerable into the acceptable. Seneca's prescription was exact. Retire into yourself as much as possible. Associate with those who are likely to make you better. Welcome those whom you are able to make better. This process is a mutual one. Men learn while they teach. Retire into yourself, not away from the world, into honest self-examination. The daily accounting of whether the situation you're in, the choices you are making, the life you are living is the one you would choose with full attention and full honesty. Because here's what Bhogal's observation ultimately points towards, and what the Stoics understood with extraordinary precision. The big disasters are easy. They arrive loudly, demand response, force a reckoning. The adaptation mechanism cannot smooth over a true crisis. The signal is too acute, the response too urgent. But the fine situation, the mediocre problem, the tolerable dissatisfaction, the barely noticeable rise in temperature, asks nothing of you in any single moment. It only asks across thousands of single moments for the quiet sacrifice of the life that was actually possible. The alarm that prevents this sacrifice is not external. No crisis will arrive to save you from fine. The alarm is internal. The practiced daily Stoic attention to whether what you are living is what you would choose. Ask the question today, not from crisis, from courage. Is this the life I would choose? If the answer is fully yes, then you're not in the fine. You are in something genuinely good. Protect it. If the answer is quiet, if it arrives with a hesitation, a caveat, a yes, but, or well, it's not that bad, then you are in the fine. The temperature has been rising. The adaptation has been working. And the moment to act is before the boiling point, not after. Jump now while you still can. And the book recommendation for this episode is On the Shortness of Life by Seneca. Of all the books that could accompany this episode, none is more precisely matched than this one. A 49 AD essay that reads as if it were written specifically for the modern professional grinding out of a tolerable but not truly alive existence. Seneca's central argument that life is not short but wasted, and that the primary mechanism of waste is the comfortable, barely examined consumption of years by situations and occupations that produce nothing worth having, is the philosophical backbone of everything Bhogal observed in 2 sentences. At fewer than 100 pages, On the Shortness of Life is the most time-efficient investment in performance philosophy available. It can be read in an afternoon. Its implications last a lifetime, and I will personally tell you that Seneca was my entry into Stoicism, and I'm still practicing it, and I genuinely believe I'll be a student of Stoicism for the rest of my life. 2 quotes from the book that I want you to carry with you. It is not what we have, but what we do with the short time that we have to live, but that we waste a lot of that short time. And this one, and the one that should be read before any conversation about why now isn't the right time to leave, fine. Lay hold of today's task, and you will depend less upon tomorrow's. So the goal is do it today, not someday, not when conditions are better, today. If you enjoyed this podcast, share, like, for someone that you think are stuck in the fine. And then do come back next time. This episode gives you the fine audit, the 5 questions for recovering the dissatisfaction signal before adaptation silences it, and the Stoic alarm system that the examined life depends on. And the boiling moment is not the time to act. It's the moment before the boiling point. Not someday, today. 1 question, just one. Is this the life I would choose? If I were choosing fresh, today, with full honesty and no prior investment to protect. You don't need to answer this quickly. You need to sit with it. You need to let the adaptation settle before you answer. And if your answer has a but in it, if it comes with a qualifier, a hesitation, well, it's not that bad, then you found the signal. The goal is not to also be reckless or dramatic, but to be specific and honest and start taking the smallest credible steps that begins you to move in the direction of genuinely good rather than the comfortably fine. Until next time, stay bold, stay soft, and keep going.